Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. It's Monday, September 6th, 2021, and today I've got a pretty quick take for Labor Day. I hope you've had a great weekend so far, and maybe you're even enjoying a long weekend. So I'm going to do a shorter episode today so I can take a little time off myself, but I want to highlight some free market views on labor and regulation and trade and stuff from some leading founders and old revolutionaries. I've got Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and two people that a lot of people probably haven't heard of very much, Arthur Lee and Pelatiah Webster. And hopefully that'll be just a little bit of a pushback on all the propaganda we get blasted with today, that if it wasn't for government partnered with regulations and unions, that we would be probably slaving away in some, who knows, some coal mine. Anyways, first of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage is everything you need to follow this program, all the archives on individual episodes. I do a link to stuff that I reference so you can read and learn more on your own time in context, because I'm really just scratching the surface. You can find our membership program where you can put your financial faith behind our work for as little as $2 a month. We make it go a long way in support of the Constitution and liberty. And of course, you can find all the different platforms that we're on. We're on a bunch of video platforms. We live stream on some. Some are just archive only, like Gab and Minds and MeWe and BitChute and BitTube. But we also live stream at all the mainstream platforms plus Odyssey.com. We also have the audio-only podcast edition, which is really growing quite a bit, and I couldn't be more grateful for you guys sharing and spreading the word on that and leaving reviews and the like. So thank you so much. Again, that show homepage is 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty, all spelled out. And just a quick, as I mentioned, membership program, please don't feel any obligation to join us. We've got over 10,000 articles and blogs and podcasts and all kinds of information on our website that we've done since 2006, a long time. And we're going to continue doing that, whether you're able to pitch in financially or not. But if you are able to, it does help us reach and teach more people every single day. And I want to say a quick thank you to just a handful of people who have joined us as members recently. There's Sarah in New York, Benjamin in Alaska, Michael in Florida, Retha in Texas, Douglas in Michigan, and William in Ohio. Thank you so much for putting your financial faith behind our work. And while we allow people another moment or so to get notifications to join us on this live stream, hello to everyone out in the live chat. There's that Liberty gal who says, smash the like button and share. Greetings from Waco, Texas. That one was actually held by, a good thing I saw it because YouTube held that one for review. I'm not sure what was wrong with that comment. Anyways, Clay Kent, Justin Bayola, Dwayne and Lyndon, Washington, Ginger McKnight, happy Labor Day to you as well. Joe Vasquez, Murray Ray, Michigan Freedom, Blue North Wind in Southeast Texas, good to see you. Justin Bayola, behind enemy lines like I am, up on the Oregon coast. Grant with the Missouri Liberty Alliance, awesome, you guys are doing great work. J.D. Davis, Sheridan Farmer, M. Gabriel, Floyd Looney, and everyone else. I really appreciate all you guys being here. You're supporting what we're doing just by participating, commenting, sharing links. Hi to Frank and Haji as well. Let's start out. I want to just get a little warm up here by going, economics isn't my primary focus, obviously, but I think it's important to understand the economics of the founding generation, because there was a kind of a huge shift at that time, moving from mercantilism, and there was a real pushback, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a few minutes, towards more free market thinking. And I want to start out with two of the places that I look to most for economics, and that's Foundation for Economic Education, fee.org, and Mises.org. Here, first of all, from Matthew Lau. This is an article published a couple of years ago on Labor Day, and here's how he starts out. He says, the occasion of Labor Day tends to be accompanied by an increase in the circulation of pronouncements from union leaders and politicians that workers, basically every human being on earth, they claim, are made better off by powerful unions and government regulations that protect, and of course he put that in scare quotes, protect workers from rapacious businesses. This narrative is widely accepted by the media and the general public, but is not supported by basic economics. And he's got a great article, and I just thought that was a nice introduction to what we're talking about today. This is the general view from most people. And of course, I went to government-run schools, so I thought that every problem we faced had to be solved by government. We were hit with that propaganda. We're blasted with it from birth through grave. And it really takes searching out for other answers in order to kind of unlearn that. Anyways, this is a really good article. I will link to it in the show notes so you can read a little bit more. He talks about the harmful effects of labor unions. So I think the message really is from this and from the article over at Mises from Tom DiLorenzo that I'm going to cite in a moment here. The message is that we've got better working conditions, better lifestyle. We're working less hours. We're not all slaving away in some coal mine in spite of government regulations rather than the other way around. Here's DiLorenzo from September 3rd, 2018 over at Mises.org. He says, in Human Action, Ludwig von Mises wrote that labor unions, and for those of you who don't know the Mises Institute or the name Mises, look it up. There's some really great stuff there. Wrote that labor unions have always been the primary source of anti-capitalistic propaganda. This is, when was Human Action published? Maybe the 20s or 30s? I don't know. Someone probably knows in the chat. I was reminded of this recently when I saw a bumper sticker proclaiming one of the bedrock tenets of unionism. The union movement, the people who brought you the weekend. And if you get the Tom Woods newsletter, my great friend Tom at tomwoods.com, he sent this out this morning as well, talking about, hey, this is just the standard thing. And you see these bumper stickers, especially around the Rust Belt. We don't really see them too much around here. But the propaganda in general is that we work less and have more leisure. We have higher income due to government and unions, a partnership. Basically, I guess that's when you're partnering between government and corporations, that's something. But here's how DiLorenzo put it. He says, of course, this is only true of a capitalist, a free market economy where private property, free markets, and entrepreneurship prevail. The steady rise in living standards in predominantly capitalist countries is due to the benefits of private capital investment, entrepreneurship, technological advance, and a better educated workforce, no thanks to the government school monopoly, which has only served to dumb down the population. Anyways, that's Thomas J. DiLorenzo over at Mises.org. And as we shift into talking about some of these quotes that I want to cite from these leading founders and old revolutionaries, here from Thomas Jefferson's Monticello website, monticello.org, they point out that while Jefferson was in France between 1784 and 1789, he acquired a copy of the 3-volume third edition of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which I believe was published. He drew upon a lot of work before that, but I think it was actually published in 1776. And there's some people who make the argument that if some of his proposals, so like one of the proposals that Smith had in the political economy, and Jefferson often referred to this book talking about the political economy, not just economics, but one of the ideas was basically representation in Parliament in England would have been based on how much they contribute to the tax fund or to the revenues of the government. And the thought then is, well, if that were the case, there would have been no other 1776, and therefore, we'd be part of Great Britain, but America would be in charge. Anyways, it's an interesting thought process, and you guys can dig into some history on that on your own time. But I wanted to point out that Jefferson regularly cited Wealth of Nations as the best book on political economy available. I often cite Algernon Sidney, and I did an episode on him as being the best book on government, according to Thomas Jefferson. But he often recognized that Adam Smith's work, and whether it was from 1790 all the way to maybe 1816 or so, even later, Jefferson in letters and in writings would repeatedly cite Wealth of Nations as being incredibly influential on his thought and very, very important, and over and over and over telling people, well, if you want something on political economy, read Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. Now, here are some of the ways that Jefferson put his views, whether they were just from him or they were influenced by Smith or not, into his own approach to government. Here's a letter to Judy Delomonde. I know I'm destroying that French, but this is August 9th, 1787. And he put it this way: the policy of American government, this is actually a paraphrase, is to leave its citizens free, neither restraining them nor aiding them in their pursuits. So he's taking the view that in 1787, He's not making an official pronouncement, but this is communication between he and his French counterpart. Like, look, this is our view of things. You guys may have it different there. And it's interesting because Hamilton's more mercantilist approach in the 1790s that George Washington went along with was really based on some work of a French economist and rejecting much of what Adam Smith was actually pushing. So it's not just this kind of agrarian versus kind of central banking approach between Jefferson and Hamilton, but it's also a difference between free markets and this kind of French command and control mercantilist approach. So the policy of American government is to leave its citizens free, neither restraining them nor aiding them in their pursuits. That's certainly not the policy today. In no way do they leave us free and neither aid or restrain in our pursuits. They're always in the way, either encouraging one part of the market to expand, artificially inflating the monetary supply, which actually creates malinvestment and causes people to get involved in stuff that they wouldn't in the first place, and then getting in the way, telling us we can't be involved in certain types of trade over and over and over. That's Jefferson in 1787, and here he is putting it into practice in his first inaugural address in March of 1801. He talks about he starts out in this speech, and he wasn't a great speaker, he was a great writer, but he was talking about all the benefits of living in these United States. And then he says, with all these blessings, what more is necessary to make us a happy and a prosperous people? So we've got all these natural blessings, but there still is a little bit more. He says, still one thing more, fellow citizens, a wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This is the sum of good government, and this is necessary to close the circle of our felicity. So he's basically putting into practice, as president, what he thought was the proper policy of the American government back in 1787. So this is 14 years later. He's got the same approach, the same viewpoint, and the same thoughts on this. Don't get in the way. Let people make their own choices. They learn, they expand, and government can only make a mess out of this. And here he is another year later in a letter to Thomas Cooper, November 29th, 1802. He says, if we can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of taking care of them, they must become happy. Again, this mentality that when government regulations get in there, government taxation gets in there, it is wasting the labor of the people, and you can't be happy. John Dickinson back in 1767, this is kind of an old school view prior to Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. In his Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, he said, we cannot be happy without being free. So freedom is what leads to happiness. And Jefferson is really putting this into practice in his presidency, or working on it. In 1802, of course, they reduced the national debt in his administration. They did do that Louisiana Purchase, which he had some reservations about, but they still reduced the national debt. They cut spending. They cut internal taxes. They got rid of the whiskey tax. Of course, the Alien and Sedition Act was gone. So this was really a policy and an approach. Now, well before Adam Smith published anything, here's Benjamin Franklin in 1766. This is a paper called On the Price of Corn and the Management of the Poor. Now, he actually wrote this anonymously, I think as Erator, and it wasn't even pointed out that he actually was the author until close to 1780. I'm not sure of the exact date on that, but he points out this. He says, I think the best way of doing good to the poor is not making them easy in poverty, but leading or driving them out of it. Of course, now we hear today that anytime someone is down on their luck or having difficulties, government has to come in, fix things, bail them out. And of course, a lot of times, government is making it impossible for people to work, for example, so you can't even earn a living. They shut down commerce, and then they make people more reliant on them. And I think in the long run, this is what supporters of the monster state want. The more that people rely on the government for their day-to-day life, the more that they're going to be more on board with whatever the government does, or unwilling to oppose them in stuff that maybe they would naturally or normally, because you don't bite the hand that feeds you. So Benjamin Franklin took a different approach. He's like, look, the best way to help people is not to give them handouts, but to give them ways to get out of poverty. He says, in my youth, I traveled much, and I observed in different countries that the more public provisions were made for the poor, the less they provided for themselves, and of course, became poorer. And on the contrary, the less that was done for them, the more that they did for themselves and became richer. And he summed it up like this. He says, you offered a premium for the encouragement of idleness, and you should not now wonder that it has had its effect in the increase of poverty. And we even see this type of thing play out today, where you have what they call the Great Resignation. At a time where there's so many jobs that need to be filled, people are just resigning from work. And a lot of people are getting away with that because there is so much government help, we'll call it. Of course, they're ripping people off. Everyone's paying for this. They're socializing the costs of it through inflation, through the nasty tax of inflation, where, your eggs that may have cost $1.99, or I remember 99 cents for 18 eggs years ago. Now I'm sounding like an old man, but now you pay $5, $6, $7 for nice quality eggs. And that's partly because of inflation. The more dollars that are circulating, the more that they print. The printing of the money, the increase in the monetary supply, that is inflation. The price increase is the result of it. Anyways, Benjamin Franklin, back in 1766, very early on, pointing out that if you subsidize poverty, subsidize idleness, you're going to get more and more of this. James Madison, as a quick side note, he took a very similar approach, even though he wasn't as free market in his thought process overall in the big picture. But he pointed us out in a speech in the House of Representatives that charity is no part of the legislative duty of the government. That's James Madison, January 10th, 1794. And the last two that I want to cover here. Now, actually, I should point out, first of all, that I think it's incorrect to say that the founders as a whole, the Old Revolutionaries as a whole, were laissez-faire, free market capitalists, 100%, especially when you include the likes of people like Alexander Hamilton, James Wilson, maybe Madison a little bit, and of course the mercantilist policies of the 1790s. Of course, you had the First National Bank. And in fact, if you do some web searches on this, you'll often find people say, it's wrong to say that the founders were in favor of free markets. Take Alexander Hamilton. And they immediately go to that. But the fact of the matter is that Hamilton's policies passed. So they were passed in Congress. Even if there was a tight battle, there was aggressive fighting over this. On the one hand, the Jeffersons, the Madisonians, Edmund Randolph, and others against, and Hamilton and his team pushing for, and then George Washington ultimately signing and implementing. There were a lot of people that were on board with this more French mercantilist approach that Hamilton wanted to take in opposition to the free market views of, at least of the time, of Jefferson, Adam Smith, and others. But the foundation was still much, much different. So even those who took the more big government view back then in comparison, today, for everything under the sun, anything, people clamor for government regulation and control to force their view on everything. And it's not working too well. Of course, back then, we know that property rights were considered the foundation. And that brings me to Arthur Lee in his great quote in 1795. And he put it this way. Let me pull it up on the screen for those of you watching. He said, "The right of property is the guardian of every other right. And to deprive a people of this is, in fact, to deprive them of their liberty." I did an episode about the founders and property rights where I also mentioned James Madison's great work on property. He did a great essay. I forget the paper that he published that in, but he did this great essay talking about how property rights isn't just physical property, but we have property in ourselves. We have property in our thoughts. We own our own body, and we have to be able to make decisions over that. We have our own thoughts, and they cannot be controlled without violating that base property right. And then one more that I want to get to before we close this short episode out here in just a moment is a guy named Pelatiah Webster, which I think it was Leonard Reed over at Fee, maybe somebody else called him the founding father of American economics. Because he did so much great writing on free markets and the like back in the 1770s and 1780s. And he put this: I humbly propose to take off every restraint and limitation from our commerce. This is in 1779. Let trade, he wrote, be as free as air. Let trade be as free as air. And it's not just the trade from business to business. If you think about it, every time you do work for somebody, you're actually trading your labor for whatever money that they're giving to you. You could be bartering for their labor. You could do a trade. That is also a trade. You're just doing trade. Let trade be as free as air. And he put it this way: let every man make the most of his goods and in his own way, and then he will be satisfied. This is the same view that Jefferson had some years earlier. If we don't let the government waste their labors, the government is not going to regulate and control what they do, they will be happy. And that's the exact same view that Pelatiah Webster had just some years earlier in 1779. And again, this wasn't just about trade between nations. A lot of times when we think about trade restrictions, we're thinking about imports and exports or between companies. But if he's referring to letting trade being as free as air, and then let every person or every man make the most of his own goods in his own way, then this means let it all be as free as air. He says, let every man taste and enjoy the sweets of that liberty of person and property, which was highly expected under an independent government. Of course, he's complaining that there's already stuff creeping in that they didn't want to have in the first place. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope it was just a fun, quick take, and I hope it was helpful in giving you guys some things to look into, to read into a little further as far as some free market views of the time. And again, there were a lot of mercantilists. There was that Hamiltonian group that really kind of won out in many ways, and we're seeing the pains of that today. We live under the largest government in the history of the world, the largest empire in the history of the world. This stuff goes very much hand in hand. And of course, it started with that central bank back in 1791. Here's a great quote from Liberty Revolutionary. Good to see you, buddy. To force a man to furnish funds for objects he disbelieves is both sinful and tyrannical. I've seen that quote a few times. If you've got a link to the citation on that, Liberty, that's a Jefferson quote, please send it over my way. Grant says, I'm celebrating Labor Day with bacon. Clay Kent, awesome as usual. Floyd Looney says, imagine if all that Social Security number was put into private investments, or people could make their own choices, right? And that's a really great way of putting it as well. They're stealing from us. They're going to run out. I mean, we've been hearing this for ages. Now they're actually upping it. They're saying, I think in the 2030s, my generation, if you're in my generation, what are we, Gen X, born in the 70s, we're not really going to have this type of thing. So if you're relying on government to save you, it's going to be a real messy place in the decades in the future. Raisin Nunn says, love the channel. Love you guys being here as well. And thank you so much for that feedback. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you're celebrating a little bit longer if you're able to. If you're able to work as well, that's also awesome as well. We have to keep pushing forward one way or the other. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. Of course, smash the like button, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, consider our membership program over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. All that stuff really helps out a great deal. And of course, thanks for being here. I'll see you next time here on the path to liberty.